Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
It becomes very, very problematic to judge characters of the past, particularly people like Savarkar. There are others also. After this, I'm working on two biographies of two contentious and also topical characters. One is Tipu Sultan and the other is Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. People who intrude modern contemporary political discourse and public discourse in a manner that very few characters of the past do. And then an objective assessment of them, which is necessary, becomes so clouded with all the political baggage and the social media noise and all of that. But I think for a historian to get deviated by all of this and to get scared or to start pandering to lobbies to ensure that his or her work gets the attention, I think that is wrong. A historian is committed to his profession of throwing light on the extant records, and that's exactly what I've done with both these volumes. Savarkar has, of course, as you rightly said, been a bone of contention, a very contentious figure, but he's hardly been academically and scholarly, in a scholarly manner, been analyzed and studied. His works largely in Marathi, which a lot of mainstream historians did not even access. And still, the last biography of his was written in the 1960s when he was still alive by Dhananjay Keer. And since then till now, though he is a part of election manifestos of political parties, he's a part of rallies, there are defamation cases, all of this happening all the time. But I'm so amazed by the singular lack of any kind of, academic, interest or scholarship, even among the historians. And the political parties who are both his opponents as well as his proponents, the latter more so, to try to understand what the man they even eulogize so much stands for in real sense. In the political circuit, he was, of course, a persona non grata. And that more so, after his implication in Mahatma Gandhi's murder, of which, of course, he was acquitted and so on. But still, that moral albatross, as Sardar Patel too had written to Shama Prasad Mukherjee and said, legally, one may be exonerated, but the moral judgment remains and so on. So that taint was somehow, and it was also, I would say, a machination of the government of the time to ensure all the political opponents were shown their place and there was no semblance of a political opposition. So for the longest time, forget biography, Shekhar. I mean, even someone like Hridaynath Mangeshkar, the Mangeshkar family was so close to Savarkar's. Lataji used to sing most of his songs, Jayostute and Sagra, Pran Tadmadala, considering the, very prolific Marathi poet that he was. Just for the fact that Hridaynath Mangeshkar, who used to work in the All India Radio, would set Savarkar's poems to tune and have his sisters record it, he actually lost his job at the All India Radio. So much for intolerance post 2014. We know where intolerance actually began, where you can't even tune the poems of a political opponent. So in such a scenario, obviously, the fear of losing one's livelihood and the taint of association, even by a long measure, probably kept a lot of people, even in the political circuit, the public discourse, to talk openly and freely about this man. It's finally a subjective interpretation. And as a historian, a writer, I have the luxury of committing my thoughts to print. Why can't we trust the intelligence of a discerning reader to make up his or her mind after seeing all the records which are made accessible to all of them? So same with Tipu Sultan. I mean, he's almost made into some kind of a mystic saint. He was not. He was a politician. So running with the hare and hunting with the hounds, appeasement of the Hindus when it needed to be done, brutalizing them when it needed to be done, was a constant feature of his politics. Of course, it had ideological, underpinnings, considering, the faith aspect which implored him to do all of this. But then that wouldn't mean you also whitewash or airbrush the good parts of his regime and administration.
And Shivaji will be another kind of challenge because, anything about Shivaji is so sensitive in Maharashtra.
My God. Yes, indeed. After we saw what happened to James Lane and his book. But of course, a lot of historians, I think, also want to be purposely provocative, and no, you talk about someone's lineage and call names to someone's mother and so on, then obviously it probably, and but though I always say it's such an irony in a country like ours where we care so little about our heritage crumbling. Tipu Sultan's armories here are just disintegrating. I don't know how the Raigad fort is of Shivaji. I'm sure that's also in a bad shape. But anything about all these holy cows, we will not accept. So an objective biography of even an Ambedkar today, or a Shivaji or a Periyar, I don't know if it can happen without your effigies being burnt on streets and people getting into the studio sets like they did of Bansali and all of that. And history becomes such a live battlefield for a group of people who don't care much about their past. And that's the classical paradox. When you had court historians of Aurangzeb or some of these rulers who were trying to, who were actually taking pride in the fact that the faith of the infidels was being crushed. And that was a royal diktat. I mean, the ulema would ask the ruler that the faith of the kafir had to be subsumed, the idol had to be crushed and put onto the steps of a masjid. I mean, what's wrong? I think India is the only place where in the world where we've not come to terms with these wounds of the past. World over, you have a Holocaust museum, you have all of that, where people go relive these bad experiences of the past, and history offers that space where you can heal the wounds and move on for the future. But in our, this miasma of having national unity getting threatened, we try to kind of whitewash these excesses, whitewash these faults, don't state facts as they are. And the more and more the muck you push under the carpet, it's not going to go away. As much of deodorant you're going to spray on it, at some point the stink is going to show up, because facts will have a tendency of showing up sometime or the other. And that's when it manifests itself in contemporary political conflicts or in social conflicts, Ram Janmabhoomi, whatever it is. All of these are manifestations of the same problem, that we have not come to terms with our history. The whole Nehruvian idea of wishing away the evil things of the past to make amends for the future. A young Muslim boy or girl today is not responsible. The albatross of Aurangzeb and Ghazni and Tipu does not lie on his or her shoulders. And on the contrary, whitewashing these excesses just to make yourself, appeal yourself to this community or any particular community is also not required. Tell the truth as it is, heal and move on, build a better future. I think that's the biggest lesson that history has taught world over, but we in India have not learned that. The manifestation of the way Indian politics took a turn in the 90s with, of course, the Ram Janmabhoomi, and then bringing into power the first non-Congress and a BJP-led government. I think in the 1970s, the Congress was still magnanimous enough to assume that the so-called right-wing parties, the Jan Sangh was hardly a force to reckon with, and the BJP was not even born then. And so the right-wing parties are there as some fringe elements. They're not going to...
Mrs. Gandhi, Indira Gandhi never called Jan Sangh a Hindu party. She always invariably called it a Baniya party.
Which it was anyway, even the Hindu Mahasabha to a large extent. But yes, so they never saw it, I guess, and that's my assessment, that they never saw, the Congress did not see these parties as a threat, so much of a threat that they would unseat them from power. So being generous, and speaking the truth for a change was still par for the course. But I think once Mr. Vajpayee came over, and then for the first time you had a BJP dispensation, which and the things they were doing, whether it was the plaque at Cellular Jail in Savarkar's honor or the portrait in Central Hall of Parliament, all of this rattled them. And since then, this narrative has gained more ground of him being this apologist and a British stooge, a traitor and a Gandhi murderer. All of this was true even when Indira Gandhi said those words of praise for him. So was a Congress Prime Minister, was Rahul Gandhi's grandmother then actually endorsing a murderer, anti-Muslim, a British stooge, a traitor and all of that? And why would she want to do that? So that's something...
Gandhi's assassin.
Huh? Sorry?
And Gandhi's assassin.
Yes. Why would she do that? So that clearly shows that this is contemporary politics trying to infiltrate into a narrative of the past. And I think Savarkar makes it clear, Shekhar, right in his treatise on Hindutva, where right at the beginning he says Hindutva has nothing to do with the theological aspects of Hinduism or about rituals. It was, in my view, twofold. One was, of course, a cultural national identity marker, particularly during the time of the Khilafat movement, where people were being led on a very dangerous path of identity politics based on religion, and that too with extra territorial allegiances outside India, and a support of a community being sought as a premium, for a cause which was not at all Indian. The second was also the political aspect of Hindutva, which was just the political pushback to political Islam. So in both these cases, I don't think the ritual aspect of it ever came into picture, because he himself, I wouldn't call him certainly an atheist, but he would certainly be I don't know, how do we translate into English a word like Nirishwarvad, somebody who was, deeply influenced by Hindu philosophy and scriptures, including in the cellular jail where he read Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. The flag of the Hindu Rashtra was also made with the Kundalini, the Kirpan, all of that. So Hindu and Sikh symbols, religious symbols being invoked, but at the same time, not into rituals. He did not want a shraddh performed of himself or of his wife when she died, all of that. So yeah, these contradictions which perhaps I think Hindutva offers that space where it clearly says right in its inception manifesto document that we have nothing to do with the theological aspects of Hinduism, which is a subset of Hindutva, so to say. But this whole issue of, he was a stooge, he wrote mercy petitions. These were not mercy petitions. In Hindi, you would call them yachika, a petition which is a very normal, legitimate tool that was provided not exclusively only to him. It was given to almost all the political prisoners. So, Ram Prasad Bismil and the whole Kakori, case, people who were imprisoned, they got a mercy petition, a petition written on their behalf. Madan Mohan Malviya sent it to the government. Tilak wrote a petition. There were so many people. Sachindranath Sanyal wrote a petition. The founder of the HRA and the leader of the revolutionaries. Several people who were given like a life term. Savarkar had 50 years of imprisonment, a double transportation for life. So rather than rotting in jail, and if you're given the option, particularly during the World War, when you had the colonies across the world, as a matter of goodwill, political prisoners were being released. And the way to release them was everyone had to give a petition saying, I have been, imprisoned, and so I need to go away after a particular period of imprisonment. So it's very much like a bail that is being sought today. So why is that made to be, when it's allowed in law, just as you can have a lawyer to argue your case, if you're given the agency of a petition, that doesn't mean you're a stooge. A premium was being put that the Muslims were not participating in the non-cooperation movement. In fact, the Khilafat movement was launched first, and then the non-cooperation was tagged onto it, where you participate. It's a barter system. You participate in this, in return we will help you in that. So why should that be? In fact, R.C. Majumdar, the historian, says by doing this, Gandhi himself somewhere tacitly said that Muslims are not, the issues of this country don't matter to them. Those they belong to some other place, that some other nation which they consider holy is what matters to them. Who is a caliph there? When the people of Turkey themselves did not want the caliph, and you had Mustafa Kemal Ataturk coming, after the World War, why were we mobilizing Indian Muslims on an emotive religious issue? And Gandhi also made the promise that within 1 year, if you participate in this, I will establish the caliphate there and I will get Swaraj. Now, neither of this happened. And the consequences were disastrous because the mobs then went on a rampage. You had Hindu carnages all through the 1920s, including the assassination of Swami Shraddhanand of the Arya Samaj, the Mopla carnage in Malabar, to all of which Gandhi was rather silent. And even Ambedkar says this was too heavy a price to pay for the mythical illusion of Hindu-Muslim unity.
What are the areas where you might find some agreement between them?
None. I don't think any. So in an article somewhere I'd written, so just as I think their portraits hang on opposite sides of the Central Hall of Parliament. I think they are two opposite poles of Indian history, and the twain shall never meet. And these are the multiple ideas of India. There is no the idea of India, the hallowed version, which we all swear our allegiance to all the time and bemoan its decline. I think there are different ideas, and these were two very, very contesting ideas. And in their life too, when Gandhi meets Savarkar in Ratnagiri, when he comes there, the two of them have a very hot debate about Shuddhi and about untouchability and all of that. And at the end, Gandhi says, our thoughts will never meet, but I hope you will allow me to do my experiments. And Savarkar, the parting shot, which kind of ruffles Gandhi, and I quote that, he says, you may do your experiments, Mahatma Ji, but then you're doing it at the cost of the nation. So the nation will pay a very heavy price for these experiments that you are trying. And Gandhi had no answer, and he walked away, and the two of them never met after that. And ironically, the same man also gets implicated in his murder. So I think these two hero, anti-hero kind of thing of modern Indian history, they would never meet, and that's perfectly fine. I think we need to have a counter narrative, a counter example to every dominant narrative that we have, I guess.
Savarkar gave the revolver to Godse for assassinating Gandhi. Is that true? No,
not at all. In fact, the revolver was not even got in Bombay. It was got from Gwalior, from Dr. Parchure, who was also one of the accused in the case. So the entire edifice of the Gandhi murder, for which Savarkar was implicated, was on the basis of a police approver called Digambar Badge, who, this was the only thing that, he gave the version to the police. The police had botched up this case so badly, Shekhar, and that's something I bring out in the case. Details shock me. There are 11,000 pages of the Gandhi murder trial I went through from the National Archives. And, in fact, the government of India, the government of Bombay facilitated the murder of Gandhi. On 20th of January 1948, the first attempt was made on his life. Between 20th and 30th of Jan, the Nagarwala, who was the commissioner in Bombay, and the Sanjeevi, who was in Delhi, between them, they let a lot of clues pass. They did not take into account so many, hints that were coming about to ensure that Gandhi's life was saved. And Gandhi was made a literal sitting duck, and which is what I think even Tushar Gandhi mentions in his book, Let's Kill Gandhi, where, and somewhere you needed all kinds of fall guys within the Congress. You needed to somehow keep insinuating that Sardar Patel, was a little lax in security because he was the home minister. Though during that period, Sardar Patel had almost left the home ministry. He had a huge fight with Nehru. He was planning to leave the Congress. Minutes before Gandhi's murder, the two of them were meeting, and Gandhi was trying to patch him and Nehru up. So you needed to do this with people outside, inside the government, and outside the government, you needed a fall guy.